Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Need a holiday gift that will keep her sparkling all year long? Blue Nile, the original online jeweler, has experts on hand 24/7 who can help you find the perfect piece. Beyond that, Blue Nile makes the gifting experience easier than ever with guaranteed free shipping and returns, as well as a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Right now, get 30% off jewelry at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for 30% off. BlueNile.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm here with Jem Duducu, who is the author of Hollywood and History, as well as another book which is going to be relevant to our conversation, Napoleon in 100 Facts. Have I remembered those titles correctly, Jem?
The second one's slightly different. It's Napoleonic Wars in 100 Facts. But yeah.
Napoleonic Wars in 100 Facts. And we're here today the fact that I made a mistake was absolutely on purpose, because we're going to be talking about mistakes and whether they matter. So that was an absolutely postmodern, self-referential thing that I've just done. And we're here to celebrate, to talk about, to criticize Ridley Scott's new film, his historical epic, or is it? Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix, which is out everywhere at the moment worldwide, and is currently doing very well worldwide, a little bit less well domestically, though still, I think it's still doing pretty well. I mean, it's still number one at the box office. I think it just might not be quite tracking as high as they wanted it to. At the same time, it's also an Apple original film, and therefore, does it have to do that well in terms of its theatrical release? Because ultimately, its principal job is to drive subscribers to Apple. And personally, I think I'd probably pop for a monthly subscription to rewatch this whenever it drops on the platform. So it's probably done that job, at least as far as I'm concerned. So, Jem, as a historian, help me out here. I've read Andrew Roberts' biography of Napoleon. His, I think it's like three-volume biography. I've done European history at A level and was awarded a D for my efforts, even though I loved European history. I didn't manage to transfer that love into good essay writing. What was your reaction to the film?
So I think what we're going to do here is talk about it. It is weird that if we were talking about, let's say, Ridley Scott's Alien, we would just purely talk about it as a piece of entertainment. But the moment you do a piece of history. And let's face it, Ridley Scott's done a load of history. His very first movie was set in the Napoleonic era with The Duelist, but then there's also Kingdom of Heaven. There's 1492. His previous movie was House of Gucci. So, he has taken various aspects of history, more recent, more ancient, throughout his entire filmic career. And it's really interesting that the conversation seems on this occasion to be more about the history, the facts, than rather, does it look good? Is it dramatic? Does it have a 3-act structure, et cetera, et cetera? And he himself has kind of gone to war on this. And from my perspective, this has been a really hot topic. Just a brief aside, this year, as far as I'm concerned, there have been 3 big historical movies. There's been Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, another Apple original movie, and this one now, Napoleon. And what I find interesting is, with Oppenheimer, people did take it more as just a drama, because everybody knows the atomic bomb was made, and there aren't enough people sitting there going, have they got the physics right? Because you really have to know your physics for it. And that made a load of money at the box office, and it was very well reviewed as well. So mission accomplished for everybody there. Killers of the Flower Moon is very much a historical story, but the problem there is it's such unknown history. You don't have endless amounts of books about the formation of the FBI or the Osage Native peoples, etc. So people see it more as a drama. But with this, and what I've seen on my feed as a historian who sort of like interacts with other historians, Napoleon genuinely is one of those rock stars of history, like Julius Caesar or Queen Elizabeth I. He is so famous that even people who are, in essence, historically illiterate know something about him. And therefore, when one of his opening lines that Ridley Scott had when he was challenged about historical inaccuracy was "get a life," that's a very inflammatory remark. Also, I don't think it's particularly clever, because who do you think is going to be first in queue for a Napoleon movie? It's going to be the people who are interested in Napoleon and not 17-year-olds who are listening to grime music, So telling those people get a life, you don't want to put anybody off going to your movie ever. And I'm sure we'll go down this route a little bit further. But of course, it is being judged by these 2 different standards. Is it a good movie? And is it good history? So for the listeners, we had this conversation before we went online. We've been going backwards and forwards. So from the point of view of John, who is not necessarily immersed in all this stuff, forgetting about the film quality for a moment, what did you learn from the movie, in theory, about Napoleon's career? What his key moments were. So what did you take away about Napoleon the man and the era?
Okay, so first of all, I'm not an absolute year zero. As I said, I have read some biographies. I have looked into his life, so I'm not completely naive. I recognized some stuff, but what I took away from it as a sort of new take was his kind of personality being much, much less alpha and much more epsilon, if you like. That he was, he seemed to be somebody. He seemed to be somebody who was kind of on the spectrum, and his success that he achieved was, there was an element that it felt like he was achieving the success partly because everybody around him were just less capable than him at just sort of plowing on ahead obstinately. There seemed to be a hole and he was there to fill it. It didn't feel, I missed from this. I don't know what to say in terms of learned. There were lots of big question marks when I was watching it, because I was thinking, did the Battle of Austerlitz actually, was there a bit that took place on a lake? I don't seem to remember that being, or river. I don't remember that. And that seems to be a huge moment. In fact, I think that's probably one of the most visually impressive moments of the film. There were moments that were that felt to me just like, even on their surface, even somebody who didn't know anything about Napoleon would sit there and go, oh, come on, that definitely didn't happen. So the cannon fire hitting the pyramids struck me as sort of blatantly kind of obviously untruthful, untruthful to the Napoleonic to the historical record. So and the some of the stuff about Moscow, I guess. So I mean, I thought there were broad episodes that aligned with stuff that I knew about Napoleon, but it was much more in the detail that I was thinking, I'm not entirely sure I remember this being the situation. Although I did think some of that detail was very telling. Like, for instance, you often hear people refer to him putting down the sort of pro-royalist rebellion as a shot of grape. And you think of that as being, for some reason, the word grape makes it sound a lot more pleasant than it actually was in reality. And I think that was a really...
The phrase that was inaccurately attributed to him is, I cleared the streets with a whiff of grape shot, which sounds very, sounds very innocent, if you like. He never actually said that, but you're quite right. They show you what happens when you turn a cannon into basically a very large shotgun at a bunch of unarmed civilians. Yeah,
and I thought that sort of stuff was interesting, but again, I don't want to preempt the conversation that we might want to have further down the line, but I never for a second thought I was watching something that was trying to say this is the real story of Napoleon.
I think that's absolutely fair. Now, in my book, Hollywood and History, which I wrote it a couple of years ago. It came out this autumn, so Oppenheimer and Napoleon aren't in it. While I was writing it, I was aware that he was about to prep for Napoleon, and Ridley Scott's in the book quite a lot for his various other historical movies. And this is the thing: if you look at all of his other historical movies, and I think he should have said this in the press. He should have said, I'm an entertainer first. I'm a historian a distant second. I hope you enjoy my movie. That's what it's there for. That would have been a much better answer than get a life. Or on another occasion, he used the line, the historians weren't there. What do they effing know about it? And it's sort of like, that is really disingenuous. You may be 85 years old, but you're not 285 years old. How did you find out about Napoleon, if not through history books? So, naughty. He is always an entertainer. I think you said in one of a sort of casual conversation on the podcast, he's never, it's always, some of his projects are more successful than others. I'm looking at you, White Squall. That's 2 hours of my life I'll never get back again. But, it's always good looking. And with Napoleon, there's so many visual cues to show. You mentioned the pyramids. You're absolutely right. That didn't happen. But he said in again, one of the interviews, he goes, that's a shorthand for, and then he conquered Egypt. And it's like, I get that. It's a very good visual way of saying he's in complete control. Now, in the movie, they obviously addressed hundreds of extras in Mamluk uniforms and stuff like that. When it goes on to Apple, it's going to have an extra hour added to it. I'll be curious how much of it will be, how does Jem say this politely, interesting love scenes between Josephine and Napoleon, and how much of it is battle, because that would be a real waste of money to leave any of the battle footage on the editing floor. But at the same time, I can't imagine they would have spent all that money and time dressing everybody up for the Battle of the Pyramids and then do nothing apart from having a CGI shot of the smashing into the pyramids. We will see. We shall see. But yeah, everything you've said, I absolutely agree with.
I definitely walked out the cinema last night thinking, I'm looking forward to seeing the director's cut, because there's always this sense that you suspend your critical appreciation or otherwise with Ridley Scott, because there's a director's cut coming down the road at some point, which Kingdom of Heaven might be a lot better.
Agreed.
Or Blade Runner might be roughly the same, or The Counselor. I've not seen it, so I'm not sure what that is, if it makes much difference at all. I mean, the thing with battles is a little goes a long way. There's unless you're like Bondarchuk and you're going to make Waterloo or War and Peace. This is the Russian director who's, if you've not seen his films, they are by far the best representations of Napoleonic battles, simply because he uses the entire Ukrainian army to I mean, when people say a cast of millions, I don't think Bondarchuk was far off having a cast of millions when he made his version of War and Peace, which is on YouTube, I think. So, I mean, if you've never seen it, my God, it's just an amazing piece of work.
But don't watch it on your phone. You're going to lose the mass of it. You want to sort of like hook it up to the biggest flat screen TV you've got to get that sense of awe.
Oh, absolutely. And if you can get a Blu-ray, I think Criterion did a Blu-ray, which is which would be the ideal way of watching it. But yeah, I mean, it's weird how repetitive battles can become, and how the film language of battles. So I was kind of interested in this, and I want to get your opinion on this, how un-Napoleonic the battles looked until Waterloo. It was a lot of people sort of running at each other rather than sort of slow marching towards each other in squares.
Look, I hear you with that. And to back you up on that, twice we see Napoleon lead cavalry charges. He didn't do that at all in his entire career. And in one of the articles that I ended up writing, so this movie has been a little bit of a cottage industry for me that I've never had with any movie before, because people have asked me to appear on podcasts, or I wrote an article for the Daily Mirror, and so it keeps coming up, and it's like, the thing I don't understand is the very first sort of conflict you see him in, which is absolutely true, is the siege of Toulon in 1793. And in that battle is the only time he was in the thick of it, because he was a junior officer and he was leading this rather daring raid. And it's the only time he gets wounded in battle. He gets a bayonet through the thigh. And it's like, why not show that? If you want to make him an action man, that's the one time it's in the history books. And also having him leading cavalry charges fundamentally doesn't show you why he was a good general. You get generals like Alexander the Great or Richard the Lionheart, and what made them good generals is they were so fierce, and when they got into the thick of it, everybody went, okay, well, if he's doing it, let's get in as well, and it works. But Napoleon's one of these ones who treated the battles like a game of chess. So he needed to be up on the top of a hill. And, one of his genuine quotes is, never interrupt an enemy while they're making a mistake. He would see that there was a gap in the forces, and it's like, send in the cavalry now. And then General Ney would go charging in with his cavalry. So the fact that, if all you know is this movie, it's like, well, he was brave. And it's like, well, no, I mean, he was brave in his own way. Nobody's going to call him a coward, but he wasn't physically brave. He was smart. And you go back to Austerlitz. So right at the end of the Battle of Austerlitz, the Austrians did start retreating over ice-covered rivers, and he did fire on those. Now, according to his own annals, and Napoleon, he had a habit of, look, when he was in exile in St. Helena, he was going to give the best acquitting of his own performance. But even he said, 200 men died that way. If you see the movie, it looks like half the army died that way. Archaeologists have been on the battlefield. They haven't found any cannonballs. Most historians think maybe a dozen guys died that way. The reason why Austerlitz is considered his greatest moment is because the Austrians and the Russians were up on something called the Pratzen Heights. They're on the hill. And if you're on high up ground, that's the place you want to be. And Napoleon amazingly lured the entire army off into a dummy, and then went up onto the hill and completely outmaneuvered these two other emperors. It's also called the Battle of the Three Emperors. So that would have looked good. Scott absolutely could have, done that. But instead, as one historian said, Austerlitz was turned into a gotcha moment. Like, he's closed the trap door. Ha ha ha. It's a bit like the Battle of Endor in Return of the Jedi. It's a trap. It's like, well, no, that's doing a gross injustice to the skill he showed. And let's face it, the skill he shows is killing people. It's war. And I did like right at the end when they show you the casualties and say in total 3 million people died. Where is this glory thing that we think about? It was just about killing people. What right did France have to conquer Russia? None, except that he thought he could get away with it. This is not a noble endeavor. But I think most people kind of like these sort of bigger than life characters doing bigger than life things until you're actually in the army fighting their cause. Then you're just cannon fodder.
So what do you feel we've already mentioned a couple now, so what do you feel were the major mistakes that the film gets wrong? And what were the things that the film got right?
Right. Okay. I'm going to be controversial here because one of the things that occurred to me as we were watching this, I just thought, I mentioned this earlier and then I got off track. What I say in Hollywood and history is like the movies that start flashing up dates and places, what they're saying to the audience is like, we've done our research, which means you really do have to do a fair representation of what actually happened. And the one I really rake over the coals is Braveheart, because nothing in that is true. But at the same time, I was watching the movie and about halfway through, I thought, how can anybody, even if they gave him enough money to do a trilogy of 3-hour movies, you are trying to summarize a 22-year career that covered 3 continents. It's impossible. You have to condense. You have to shove it down. But some of the choices are weird. I don't know if they're going to be remedied in the longer cut. But the thing that really made his name is his conquest of Italy, which isn't even shown. Now, the affair with the cavalry officer, that actually started while he was in Italy. And what I liked about the movie is the dynamic between, you might find this weird, but Josephine and Napoleon, because at least for the first half of their relationship, she was absolutely in control. Now, what they got wrong in the movie, and we had this conversation the last time I was on, actors are the age they are, okay? And they decided to not de-age them or anything like that, which is the right way to go, so you can actually see their faces rather than digitization, fair enough. But Joaquin Phoenix is the same age as Napoleon at Waterloo. He's the same age as the guy at the end of his career. They picked Vanessa Kirby to play Josephine. So Vanessa Kirby is 14 years younger than Joaquin Phoenix. Josephine was 10 years older than Napoleon. So we're off by a quarter of a century. Mm-hmm. And it kind of makes sense that this 23-year-old guy at the beginning of his career is kind of he's naive, he's completely innocent. I think he's been with one woman in his entire life, and Josephine has had to survive through the French Revolution by using her feminine charms. She knows how to use it, and she uses it on Napoleon, and he is completely outclassed. And they show that in the movie, but the fact that she's younger makes it a bit different. And indeed, later on in the movie, when Josephine can't conceive, because Vanessa Kirby is a woman in her prime, you assume it's a medical condition. But no, Josephine had hit the menopause. There was a very obvious biological reason why she couldn't have children anymore. And he always loved her. So I did like the relationship. But to some people, I've literally seen a YouTube video, with the thumbnails of a picture of Joaquin Phoenix's Napoleon with just cuck written across it. And I heard somebody else say, it seems to imply that Napoleon was an incel. And it's like, we're using very modern language, but absolutely when he, again, maybe this is in the extended version, but I found it hilarious when I did the research. Napoleon conquers Italy. He's the first person to conquer Italy since the Roman era. It's an amazing achievement. He's 26 years old. And on the way, he spies an Italian palace and he goes, Josephine, I have got a palace for you. And she's off shagging this cavalry officer. And it's actually the French government who say, he's your husband. He's just conquered Italy for us. Go down to Italy and stay in the nice palace he's found out for you. And it's just like, so yeah, it really does make Napoleon look a bit foolish in that situation. And that's true. That is accurate. But, the thing that I think probably boiled my blood the most is after the retreat in Russia, the next thing we see is he's being exiled to Elba. It's like, you've missed a year and a half. You've missed the largest battle in the whole war, which is the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of the Nations. And I get you've got a limited budget, but now you're creating a completely wrong cause and effect. Those two events were separated by 18 months and several campaigns of fighting later. But again, you've only got 2.5 hours to tell the story. But again, why did you choose that? There's already a perfectly serviceable movie just about the Battle of Waterloo. Maybe we don't need that again, but maybe you just do it about Austerlitz if you like that battle so much. Or maybe you do the second half. He's become emperor. Now we see the second half of his career. But to try and do 22 years in even 3.5 hours, good luck.
The sweep of it was, okay. But what did you like about it? I mean, you've already mentioned the relationship. You already mentioned that, and that's a good thing.
Uniforms looking good. The uniforms are looking good. Waterloo is completely wrong, and again, this actually it sort of insults Wellington. The key thing about the Battle of Waterloo is Wellington knew that Napoleon knew how to use his artillery. He's an ex-artillery officer, and so where all the Allied forces were, apart from the Prussians, was on a reverse side of a slope. So he protected, let's say, 80% of his army behind the crest of a hill. Whereas in the movie, you see him being pounded like it's World War I. And it's like, how much can the British redcoats take before they break? And that's just not what happened. But did I feel the sweep of Waterloo? Did I get a little bit misty-eyed as they go into the anti-cavalry infantry squares with the Union Jacks hanging in the middle, the standards hanging in the middle? I mean, that, you have to be a pretty stone-faced Englishman to not feel a little bit of sort of like patriotism swelling at that point. It looked great. By the way, because I know you like my stuff about rifles and things like that. Although the British did have riflemen in the Napoleonic era, none of those rifles were that accurate, and nobody used scope sights. Those scope sights came in a generation later, and we have the hat from the Battle of Waterloo, no hole in it from a sniper.
Yeah, I felt that was a bit inconsistent. That felt like something that had been, as you say, that it felt incomplete to me. I was expecting that scene when he got his hat shot, that Wellington would turn and say, "Arrest that man. I want him, he should be on a gibbet by the, and we would see something of Wellington's sort of like a hatred of his own army, and that, contempt, not hatred, but contempt of his own army, of like, the most important thing is you do what I tell you, not that you take a pot shot at the other generals and,
And also it's called Napoleon. You said, what do I like? But so it's called Napoleon, and it genuinely is about Napoleon. Now, that is to the detriment that he had some really competent generals and marshals underneath him. I have got no idea, apart from Dumas, who's the black one. The other ones, I don't know which one is Bernadotte or Soult or Ney or whatever. I had no idea who they were. There were various guys preening around in the background, but it says it on the tin. This is about Napoleon, and the movie absolutely is about Napoleon.
Yeah, they sort of bigged up his family, didn't they? And I'd always got the feeling that there was actually quite a lot of rivalry between the marshals and the family, because the marshals were getting there on bravery and elan, and his brothers were getting there just because they were members of his family. It was just like, oh, the Memphis Mafia following Elvis around. I mean, I don't think it necessarily detracts from a person in a portrait if you include people around them. In fact, I think that sort of disempowers him as a character, in that he seems very isolated. He seems to spend a lot of his time in empty rooms, and this guy's a huge leader, and he's got to be the smartest man in the room in a lot of different rooms, in a lot of different situations, and you never really got the sense of that. There was one great scene where he'd come back to Paris and somebody starts talking to him and he goes, shush, 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 I've just come back, I've found out this has happened, and now I've found out my wife is a slut. So and he just sort of dominates the room in a way like, I don't care about your opinions. My situation is much more important than yours. And it just sort of like, those moments were really interestingly charismatic, but it felt like something more like Joaquin Phoenix doing a really interesting character study of someone who dressed as Napoleon. I mean, one of the things about Napoleon, which was still around in my day when I was growing up in like the 1970s, 80s, is if you had like, you wouldn't have it these days because of political correctness, but if you had like a comedy like The Pink Panther, where the chief inspector has gone crazy and is sent to a lunatic asylum, as they were then called, you would have someone dressed as Napoleon walking through the garden, and that would just tell you that, there's a crazy person, because the crazy people would think they're either Jesus or Napoleon. That was the cultural power of this image, and in a way that maybe isn't quite people aren't quite aware of that anymore because, well, the 19th century is a long time ago after all.
Yeah, and look, we now got superheroes and things like that. But it is interesting how many column inches have been generated by this movie. And, for all of the historical inaccuracies, I'm loving the fact that I'm having conversations about the Battle of Austerlitz rather than Big Brother. Or, what are you getting for Secret Santa? These things, he did shape Europe. For better or for worse, you can't understand the 19th century, which is a big deal in Europe, without Napoleon and indeed the effects of him. And his nephew, Napoleon III, ended up running France again. So, he casts a long shadow. And that's not a joke about him being short. I feel obliged to say, if anybody here thinks that he's short or listening to this thinks he's short, you are believing 200-year-old British propaganda. Now, of all the bad things you can cast on your enemies, I think that's pretty tame. And we had very good reasons 200 years ago to be pretty angry with Napoleon. But that's just simply not true.
Yeah, the sort of Corsican dwarf sort of political cartoons, which actually pop up in the film as well. That he keeps getting handed newspapers by his rather dull-witted, aides and valets, so that he can read about Josephine's infidelities. I did love the humor in the film. I mean, let's move on to the idea of the film as a film. The film as a film, and I was going to say that because you said earlier on the joke about, and I found out my wife's asleep. It's like it was laugh out loud funny 3 or 4 times for me, and deliberately so, not because it was bad, but because that's a gag, that's a genuine joke. And the other bit that I thought was really funny, and again, this was edited differently in the or edited around in the trailer, was the bit where he goes into the consuls and say, "Shall we vote?" But the first thing you see is he loses the crowd. They're about to kill him. He runs out. Him and his brother prat around and go, "Come on, everyone back in." And then he goes, "Now shall we vote?" And that was genuinely funny. The great line to the British ambassador, you all think you're so great because you've got boats. And I've heard some people say that's a terrible line. It's like, that's a joke. If you can't tell that was meant to get a laugh, not just a badly written line, shame on you, So, it was funnier than I think any historical epic I've ever seen before. It also concentrated on the private life of the person more than any other one I've seen before. And when it was epic, it was properly epic. Can we agree on that? Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is going to come a time when we're going to have to rethink how we do battles, and we're going to have to go back over, unlearn some lessons that we learned during Lord of the Rings and things, and try to sort of genuinely rethink, 2 bunches of people clashing in the middle, just because I find that, I don't know, it just feels like something I've seen 1,000 times. But in this situation, I think they managed to make each battle impressively different, and I kind of knew what each battle they needed to do. So I knew at the beginning they needed to get the cannons, turn them around and fire them on the ships. I knew Waterloo was, I kind of had a good sense of what was going on each one. I kind of thought Waterloo might have been the least impressive of all the battles, actually, just in the sense that it kind of didn't, numerically, it just didn't look that there were that many people. Ultimately, it looked like a rainy field in Belgium. It almost looked like it was coming down.
I mean, that's what it was. But...
I know, but I don't know. You kind of have this idea of it being. There are those stories. Who is it? There's some guy who gets his leg taken off and turns to a general and says, "By God, I think I've lost my leg."
Okay, no. So that I was kind of again, that would have fitted well in the movie. So that's Lord Uxbridge, and virtually at the end of the film. So he's on his horse next to Duke of Wellington. French cannonball takes his. I mean, this is probably the most British story you'll ever hear. It takes his leg off from the just below the knee down, clean off, and his response is, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." And Wellington looks over and goes, "By God, sir, so you have." That is real history. Why not use it? And I found it interesting in the in the Waterloo movie, they use far more real quotes from both Wellington and Napoleon than in this movie. I think there are a couple of lines that I recognize, but almost everything else was clearly a script. And fine, that is a creative choice, but Napoleon's really quotable. You can stick in some of his lines, and they're quite good. Like at the Battle of the Pyramids, his opening line to his army was, "Soldiers, from 40 centuries, the pyramids look down upon you." And it's like, that's a good line. That's the beginning of the Braveheart speech kind of thing. Nothing.
Yeah. You said you definitely didn't get as. I mean, he wasn't a people person, this Napoleon. He was kind of like, as I said, it feels like. I don't mean this with any disrespect to the neurodiverse, but it definitely feels like he was on the spectrum. He was somebody who kind of was he was good at war and strategy, and he was good at not caring about lives. He was good at sort of, as you say, sort of proficiently killing people, but didn't seem to be much of a people person. And I kind of think that's got to be in Napoleon's skill set, hasn't it? I mean, otherwise, why would they love him so much? I mean, you saw that one moment where he's like handing out bread to the common soldiers, the soldiery.
Yes.
And I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a real, the brave of Austerlitz, well done, here you go, lads. And you can see that was like, yeah, they like him and they have good reason to like him. And he's much more comfortable with them than he is with the diplomats and the emperor and the other generals and stuff.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I'll be honest with you, the Joaquin Phoenix role that this reminded me the most of, which really surprised me, was Joker.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Hey, it's Mark Maron from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
He's almost on the outside of society looking in. He's kind of guessing what he has to do in these situations. And again, about the funny, every single love scene between him and Josephine was hilarious and awkward and awful. Whereas the scene she has with the cavalry officer is shot in the way you would expect a historical epic to be. It was kind of sensual and romantic. He's just plowing a field, says Jem politely. Okay, I don't want to lose lose your clean rating or anything, but yeah, every time I actually chuckled. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that there was a little, because you keep using the term neurodiverse, which obviously the Joker character he was going for as well. Could you see an element of that there?
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. And I mean, his approach to her, I thought was brilliant. I really, really rated that. I really thought the romance in this, the romance is the wrong word, because it's in fact, that's the way I think I would look at this most profitably or most rewardingly is this film is very anti a lot of stuff generically. I think it's kind of anti-epic. I mean, it does do size, but is it really epic? I mean, it's big, but it's not epic. So I think that might be why you don't have these. This is a film which is against the big man of history idea. But I'm not necessarily sure it's epic, which has an idea of exalting a moment in history or exalting a person. Napoleon, one of the reasons he's popular is kind of because of this big man in history the big man of history who makes all these decisions and, as you say, molds Europe into a shape of his desire. This showed that he did do stuff, but at the same time, there's this paradox where, yes, he's a big man doing all these changes, but at his heart, if there is such a thing, there's a kernel seed. He's a tiny man. He's someone who is inadequate, insecure. He's a doofus. He can't get down some stairs without falling over at one point. He's sticking his fingers in his ears so he doesn't hear the artillery go off. He's a mama's boy. There's all this sort of fragility to him, and so what if you give him the famous speech and make him into a Mel Gibson character, then that's goes against what I think Scott is trying to do here.
I hear you on that, and I would broadly agree. I think that, and what I found fascinating, because he was, let's be blunt, he was such a loser in his private life. It therefore was a brilliant juxtaposition that he was the most feared man in Europe. And then you see how competent he is at something like and cold at something like the Battle of Austerlitz. I liked that juxtaposition. But what I find interesting is how edgy the French have been about this, and said this is all just British propaganda. They're showing him blah 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 blah. But it's worth reminding you that France banned Paths of Glory for like 20 years. All right, and that's not even yes, some people were shot for cowardice in World War I. This is not a specific incident. The characters are all made up, and that was still enough for France to go, we're banning this for decades. And it's like, so how would you do it? And the thing is that every time they've portrayed Napoleon, they've portrayed him as a fluent French speaker, basically a Frenchman. And it's like, he's Corsican. His first language was Italian. He was teased in military academy for having this thick Italian accent. He was born the same year Genoa gave France Corsica. He in no way grew up feeling, vive la revolution, etc. And
Napoleonic Bonaparte.
Yeah, beautiful boy. Yeah, it's not French. So I did like that juxtaposition. I think you might have been able to give him a speech somewhere, because again, he's competent at this, but it's almost like saying he knows how to communicate to men. He's got no idea how to communicate with women, and does he even know what he wants in life? But this thing about this fragility, it's there. If you want to read the papers now, maybe the French feel it's way overdone, and this is the direction that Joaquin Phoenix clearly wanted to go. But again, I don't think that if the French did it, we would get the epic, and all of these inadequacies would be wiped away, and that's just as bad as having the simpering guy, who's almost doing it to prove himself a real man to his girlfriend, which is a fascinating take on history.
Yeah, but I mean, I love that idea as well, that if he'd been born like a few months earlier, he would never have been able to have the career he did in the French military, because he wouldn't have been born in France. It literally would have been Italian. So it was one of those fortuitous moments that happen sometimes in history. Or unfortuitous, depending on your, there's nothing about the Peninsular War. There's nothing about Spain. There's nothing about, as you say, Italy and Venice. So, I don't have a problem with that. I have no problem whatsoever. David Lean doesn't do the whole of T.E. Lawrence's life. He just does an episode, which is interesting. I think you can pick and choose, and you can do things artistically. Also, I think that idea of let's go against this idea that a little man with certain insecurities and fragility can have disastrous effects on the world speaks very much to our contemporary political situation. So there is a sense
absolutely.
This is a film which is, yes, it's set from 1789 to 1815, 1820 when he died. When did
I
Napoleon
think it's
die?
21. But
21,
yeah, I mean, it doesn't. Yeah, it's after the war, but not by much.
Yeah. I think it's 6 years later or something. So that would make it 21. There is the sense that that this is looking at the populist leaders of today and saying, look, these guys exude this idea of strength and of aggression and of hostility, and but they're doing it from a point of weakness, and they're not doing it for the good of the world. I mean, there's a great speech that he has to one of the diplomats where he's talking about, I'm a man of peace. No one can bring peace to Europe except me. I'm the one who's going to bring peace. And it's like, you're the main warmonger here.
Yeah, and it is interesting if you look at it. His you got Talleyrand, who is his foreign secretary, basically, who was a genius diplomat. And what Talleyrand fundamentally understood is if every time you broke up, you may have utterly crushed the enemy, but if your terms are so punitive, all they're going to want is revenge. And in an amazing way, Napoleon unified Europe like nobody else has in the whole of history. And so if you want to get a little bit historical for a moment, Waterloo was where he finally met his match. But but people have said it was a very close run thing. There were ways that he could have won it, which is true, but it's irrelevant because if he had beaten Wellington, the Austrians and the rest of the Prussian army and the Russians were on their way. He had run out. He had angered all of Europe, and he had less of men every single time he fought. He was done. He was absolutely done. He shouldn't have come back, but he was gonna because he was Napoleon. And so, yeah, it is sort of quite telling about he didn't know when to quit and yada yada yada, and he didn't necessarily listen to the people around him. His marshals he picked because of their skill. In Britain, there was still an awful lot of, you've got enough money to buy a captaincy in the army. That's not the best way to run an army, or indeed, you're Lord Liverpool, so you can now become, a general. So this is the thing. He is an interesting person. He has flaws and he has strengths. He did reintroduce slavery. That's not a good thing. I don't think anybody's going to say, yay, slavery. But also at the same time, because he was losing so much money, all of French lands in America was sold to America. It's referred to as the Louisiana Purchase, and that's what turned the 13 colonies into the Americas of today, because it wasn't just Louisiana. It was most of the drainage area of the Mississippi River. It was a colossal amount of land. Now, obviously, the French didn't have colonies all the way around it. It was very much owned by the local indigenous peoples. But the idea is it gave a legal how can I put it? Sort of like a little legal bow on their land grabs in America. So pretext. Thank you very much. He is so important, and there are things you can do ticks with, and things you can definitely do crosses with, and therefore, I actually quite liked the fact that this was a multi-layered Napoleon that we saw in this movie. But going back to, fundamentally saying, let's talk about the film a bit more, what I found interesting is after seeing it, my family went, what do you think, Dad? And I told them all about it. And I just realized, it's like, shall we all go and see it on the weekend? It's like, no, I'm fine. I can wait till it's on Apple and I can see the longer version. Whereas when I saw Gladiator, which has loads of historical inaccuracies in it, but it's also one of my favorite films. It is just an amazing piece of cinema. I saw that twice in the same week when it first came out, because it's like, this is amazing. I want to experience this again. But with Napoleon, it's a good, competent film. I'd give it 3.5 stars personally. I don't know what you would think, but he's trying to cram so much in. I feel like I'm getting the greatest hits, and even the greatest hits are covers.
I was asked recently by another internet site to do a sort of top 5 of Ridley Scott, and I found that after I did like Alien, Blade Runner, there was a long pause. I love Alien and Blade Runner. I think they're two.
Didn't Gladiator jump in there?
I think. Well, this is my point. This is the point I would make. Is I think he's a brilliant director of 4-star movies. I think the Alien and Blade Runner are his masterpieces, and then he's made a big sack of 4-star movies, all of which are really good, but most of which I don't necessarily love. So I think The Last Duel, I think I gave The Last Duel 5 stars when I reviewed it, but it's a little bit different reviewing it and sort of, putting it in your sort of all-time greats or whatever. The Last Duel, interestingly enough as well, I think is almost like his Rosetta Stone also has a Napoleonic origin.
Yes. Yeah.
And I loved him standing on the box to look at the pharaoh. I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah, the one comment about shortness, which I'll let pass. Okay,
yeah,
fair
but
enough.
It wasn't even really about shortness. It was just about this guy's in a casket, and I want to look at him face to face. The Last Duel strikes me as being like a Rosetta Stone for Ridley Scott's idea of history generally, which is I want to sort of go behind the scenes. I want to show you how a Colosseum worked with this sort of modern sensibility, with this sort of like, it's like a celebrity, it's like violent entertainment. I'm going to show you the origin of Muslim-Christian antipathy via the Middle Ages, and I'm going to take away the idea of knights being this romantic, these crusaders being these romantic figures. And it just, I'm going to take away Christopher Columbus being this amazing sort of heroic figure and show him as someone who was savage and brought slavery to the New World. Everywhere he looks at history, he seems to be sort of wanting to get underneath the skin of it a bit more, which is not the same as saying, I want to say what really happened, because I don't think he's really interested in what really happened. He's interested. Ridley Scott is a visual director. He's interested in what looks good, and he's interested in sort of giving an idea of lived experience. A lot of the things in Napoleon felt to me like I didn't really feel this was historically. It didn't really just seem relevant. It seemed to be much of it seemed to be in Napoleon's head. Much of it seemed to be like the Egypt thing. That felt like he was writing a letter to Josephine about, and I fired a cannon at the pyramids. There's even a bit where he says something to the Tsar.
Are you saying he's the American Psycho? That it's all in the head, basically.
Well, that wouldn't be a bad reading. There's a bit where he's talking to the Tsar and he says, and I said to the French, I said to the British,
yes,
you lack honor and you lack money, and we both see in each other. And the Tsar says, oh, wait a minute, that's a saying. We have that saying. You didn't actually say that. It's a saying. And he's like, oh, well, whatever. We can both agree we hate the British. And it's just like, oh, you're a fabulist. You're just making this shit up. I mean, you're not making it up.
And he did in his own memoirs. There was these huge exaggerations, and you see this right at the end when he's talking to the two little girls, and he goes, "Do you know who burnt Moscow? It was me." And they go, "No, I think you'll find it was the Russians." And do you know what? There were those examples you just gave, and particularly the talking with Tsar Alexander I is. Okay, it's another weird. We've gone down a rabbit hole here. Okay, We've compared him to the Joker. We've compared American Psycho. I'm going to do the worst one here. There were moments where he reminded me of, let's see if you know this reference, Arnold Rimmer from Red Dwarf.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember Red Dwarf, definitely.
Yeah, and sort of like the pompousness and the way Rimmer in his own head thinks he's amazing and everyone else just thinks he's an utter loser. And yeah, so it's not often that you get Joker, Rimmer, and Napoleon all in the same mix. But that was my experience of it anyway.
Absolutely. Even when the daughter of Josephine comes round to get a sword, who, by the way, I thought was a boy at the beginning when she came round.
That was a boy.
Was it? Because she turns up later as a girl.
No, she had a boy and a girl.
Okay. Okay. Well, that was weird that I didn't quite understand that. Anyway, but he goes into the room with all the swords and goes, we really should have put names on these. And just picks a random sword. I mean, those were brilliant moments of like, all of these swords, by the way, is a life. These are all dead people.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and he's just like, I guess this one will do. And even he's standing at the door and he's kind of opens it. And in my head, he's just checking to make sure there's not a name engraved on it or something. It's just like occurs to him. Oh, I better. No, it's blank. Okay, good. That's just like, he doesn't want to.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. But on your point there about the each one of those, I thought that was a very beautiful way of saying, like, if each one of these are officers' swords and they're all in the sort of like the storeroom, this tells you about the number of dead. But again, this is where Britain and France have a completely different reading on the French Revolution. From the French perspective, it was a necessary cleansing, and when you consider 500 years of corruption, it wasn't that much blood. But from the British perspective, where we haven't had that kind of level of just raw crowd violence, like literal execution after execution. It was actually Charles Dickens in Tale of Two Cities, where that was his only book where he actually went back in time and sort of set it against sort of historical events, where we get a very British reading of this.
Barnaby Rudge.
Apologies.
Okay.
But Dickens really leans into the anarchy and the blood of it, which is the way Britain has always seen it. Now, of course, it's probably somewhere in the middle, okay? This was bloody and probably was bloody necessary as well. But let's not forget that these people, just because you're rich doesn't mean you should have your head removed. That's a very strong political opinion. And France can't just pretend that it was a minor inconvenience. Somebody like Josephine, I think they do a very good job of showing her survivor and that conversation with Napoleon going, I had to do things to just stay alive. Is this going to be a problem? Do you need to know about my past? I liked that. I thought Josephine had a lot of agency in this movie.
I love the bit where she's apologetic to him and she's basically being slut-shamed and accused of infidelity and all these things, which actually justifiably in terms of the cavalry officer. And then she turns it around and repeats exactly his words back. It's like she suddenly realizes, hang on a minute, this guy hasn't left yet. He's still here. He's not stormed out. I've told him everything, and he's not gone anywhere. And so you need me. Without me, you're nothing, and that, I thought that was brilliant. I genuinely am looking forward to the longer version, and if they give me more of that and not more battles, I'm quite happy, to tell you the truth. I wouldn't, because to me, that was the most interesting bits. I liked his oddness. I liked the oddness of the movie. I'm really impressed by how odd it was. I find...
Absolutely, yeah.
I just find that, and as you said earlier, the comedy, I thought was just brilliantly done. I just found so much of it laugh out loud, funny, and witty, and even like him, the brilliant Tahira character, Paul Barras, sticking his finger in the guy's hole, Robespierre's hole, where he shots at and saying, "You missed." It's like, it's just
that actually. I mean, he didn't stick the finger in the hole, but that happened. He did try and kill himself, So I mean, I love these moments of history.
Robespierre was a lot skinnier in my imagination.
He was, yes. Yeah. But I just want to sort of you're talking there about like what's more. I think problem with Killers of Flower Moon, which I haven't really we mentioned in passing, but Scott has said, who's got time for a 3-hour plus movie? Thank you very much, Ridley. I appreciate that. I watched all of Killers of Flower Moon, and I it's 3.5 hours long, and I sat there and went, this could be 3 hours. There are just moments when nothing is happening, and it's like, okay, it may be a beautiful moment between these two characters, but we've already had those, and I just felt it went on. If it was cut down to 3 hours, it's probably the right size, and nothing game-changing is going to be left on the cutting room floor. It'll be very interesting to see what happens here, because sometimes the longer versions, the rhythm's all off, etc., and it just feels much longer. So I'm just curious. Have you seen Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yeah, I watched it. Where was it? Cannes, I think, when it opened.
And so, what did you think? Do you think it was the right length, or?
No, I was looking at my watch at certain points in the movie. Definitely. I mean, I think my problem with Killers of the Flower Moon was that I think they started off with very good intentions, trying to make a film about the Osage, but the fact that the Robert De Niro character is the character who's sort of most he's an interesting figure, because he sort of is a white man who's very respectful of the Osage on the surface, but is absolutely, and maybe even believes himself to be the best thing that's happened to the Osage. He's somehow protecting them from themselves while robbing them and exploiting them and murdering them and all the rest of it. And I kind of felt that the film follows a similar route in feeling that it's very respectful of the Osage, but then it puts its main character, Lily Gladstone's character, it kind of puts her to bed for the second half of the movie. As soon as she's in bed, it's just like we're just watching the DiCaprio De Niro show, and it's good to see De Niro acting. I think DiCaprio gave one of the lesser convincing performances of his career so far, but any sort of sense of empathy, my empathy just disappeared, because where am I supposed to put it? That it's gone to bed. And am I supposed to feel sorry for DiCaprio? I mean, the man's a doofus who just wants money, and quite openly. So I found it a strangely unmoving film. I mean, I'll happily rewatch it, because lots of people who I very much respect are calling it a masterpiece. But for me, this year has been full of great filmmakers making okay films. I would put David Fincher's The Killer.
I think you said Oppenheimer was. I've now seen The Killer as well. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a very well put together. It was like an Audi, well put together, not going to be remembered in 10 years' time. I do think that Oppenheimer was probably a masterpiece.
Oh, Oppenheimer's without doubt a masterpiece. I talked to Tom Schoen about that, I think.
Yes,
I think I did.
I know you had a good debrief with somebody with it. I can't remember the name, but and it's if you like. That's also a little bit like Napoleon, in the sense that he was a great man, in the sense that he achieved something that nobody else has done in the whole of history, and again completely changed the world. But they don't let him off the hook. They show him to be weak and arrogant and hubris, and and so I like these sort of more multi-layered, textured takes on these inverted commas great men from history.
Yeah, absolutely, and much. I mean, I don't mind Braveheart being historically inaccurate. What I don't like about Braveheart is that it's just a power fantasy for a sort of a little bit of a fascistic super action hero. He just wants to be this, and slightly weirdly masochistic as well by the end of it. Oppenheimer, on the other hand, I thought was rich, nuanced, clever. I've since read the screenplay since my conversation with Tom, and it reads like a brilliantly written novel. It just reads so well. It's like something. The screenplay that it most reminded me of was something Dennis Potter might have written in the 80s. Very fluid, very. You know what I mean? It doesn't worry about scene changes. It breaks things down. Scenes can be long. Scenes can be a mere moment, and it's so confident in that. And when I heard that Christopher Nolan was being considered for the Bond, I was like, no, don't do it. You're too good. You should be making, Oppenheimer, Interstellar, even if you want to make your Bond movie, make another Tenet, make something that for all its flaws is still original, has still something going on which you haven't seen anywhere else.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And just to sort of put the three of these movies together, that you've got Oppenheimer, which as I've already said, well-reviewed and made a ton of money. Great, okay? Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon probably aren't going to make their money back, but it's a different business model because of Apple, but both have been well-reviewed, and both of them have got a lot of column inches. And then at the same time this year, we've had flop after flop of superhero movies. So Hollywood is, if it's one thing, it's predictable, and it likes to follow trends, and hopefully what this will lead to is like, people are a little bit sick of spandex. Maybe we should do somebody else from history. I don't know who it is. I don't know what they would be doing, but I would, it's been a long time since we've seen this level of interest and this level of effort put into historical movies. And even if they're flawed, because it has, there is this argument from some filmmakers. It's like, look, I'm making a piece of entertainment. If you want to learn more, read a history book. And it's like, but I have been pestered a lot this week about, so what is true, Jem, about Napoleon and things like that? And that can only be a good, I'm not saying I'm the big owner of Napoleon. There are far greater writers out there and historians than me, but at least we're being asked the questions again, as opposed to who do you think is going to win Big Brother, or have you seen Hulk 3 or whatever? And yeah, I mean, history is everything. And something like Killers of the Flower Moon, I do think it's too long. I think all the performances are great. It's not a perfect film, but I think it's an awesome film, and Scorsese, if he was to die tomorrow, that would be a great one to go out on. But it's an example of showing some history, which isn't just white men in like togas or medieval armor. History has broadened its scope, and we're all the better for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just want to pick up one final point before we close this off. We're talking about films in terms of story, character acting, all that sort of stuff. But I just like to also point out production design, because if you look at Killers from the Flower Moon, it was designed by Jack Fisk, who did There Will Be Blood. He did a whole bunch of films which were a whole bunch of Terrence Malick movies, obviously, my area of interest. And I think the look of the town when they first come into it is great. I think the look of Napoleon in certain moments is really well done. And I think Oppenheimer perhaps is the best of all in terms of really recreating a sense of place in a way that we sometimes, especially with CGI being so commonly used, we get these sort of virtual backgrounds, and it's like, I mean, Napoleon suffered a little bit from that I think in 10, 15 years, you'll rewatch Napoleon and go, yikes, when it comes to Waterloo or Austerlitz or something. But can
I just add to that?
Yeah.
Because I do enough of these sorts of things and visit enough of these places. I love the fact that Blenheim Palace, and so basically for all the human beings, they're in front of real stone and that will look fine. But Blenheim Palace was repurposed into the Kremlin. So basically from the roof up, that's all digital matte painting. And it's like, okay, well done for using half of a stately home. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah. Well, Moscow is actually the kind of one of the most, this is Narnia or somewhere? Where are we? It's sort of...
Yeah, he did go to war with the Ice Queen. Didn't you know that?
I always loved that battle that he did just before Moscow, just 200 miles. Borodino, where he held his men sort of in front of the Russian artillery for way too long. And even though he won the battle, he won it with a massive loss of life on his own part.
But yeah, just to give you one of these sort of like little historian things, there is a pretty compelling argument that Napoleon was better when he had less troops. Austerlitz was like his peak. And again, he was outnumbered at Austerlitz. But the bigger the battle, like Waterloo, like Borodino, like the Battle of the Nations at Leipzig, Borodino was basically just two massive armies smashing into each other. There wasn't a lot of subtlety or maneuver. One of the things apparently that the French struggled with against the Russians is the Russians were so used to fighting the Ottoman Empire, which didn't surrender, that they kept thinking, well, this is where the enemy breaks and runs away. But the Russians would just stood there because they didn't want to be massacred by the Ottomans, not realizing the French actually fought by slightly different rules. So, yeah, I mean, look, there's no way you can put that level of subtlety or historical accuracy into a movie like that. But I just, for your listeners, it's an interesting idea that the bigger the army he had, the less original Napoleon actually was. The other last thing I'll say is, on the technical stuff is, he outflanked people, he outmaneuvered people, he came up with innovations, and he did really clever things. But if you've been fighting the same enemy for 20 years, you learn their tricks. And so again, by Waterloo, Napoleon had nothing in the tank that that Wellington couldn't anticipate or neutralize, or had already come up with a new counter to.
Yeah, because in the Italian campaign, he sort of he scared everybody with how fast he could go, because they didn't have provisions. They just lived off the land, which then Wellington did when he was fighting the Peninsular War. And it was sort of like Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola learning from each other.
Yeah, let's throw football in there as well. Why not?
Why not? Listen, Jem, who would you like to see a big movie made of next? What sort of historical figure deserves?
That's easy, because the person who I really like is somebody who can't
say yourself.
That would be a very boring movie. No, Edward III, King of England. He has never had a movie or TV show ever about him. And yet this is a guy who started the 100 Years' War. He fought in multiple battles. The Black Death arrived in England during his reign, so he had to deal with like Armageddon, where half of Europe dies. Okay, how do you deal with that? And when he started off, he was basically under house arrest because his mother had killed his father, and she was having an affair with this other guy. I mean, this is a pretty good story, which I've got no idea why literally nobody is interested in making. That's the one for me.
That sounds.
By the way, if anybody's listening to this and wants some help on a screenplay, I'm available.
Excellent. Well, we'll talk after the record. I'm trying to think what would happen if the Black Death arrived now with the no-vaxxers. Would they be like, oh, this is just a false flag? And
I'm going to say Mother Nature's going to look after that one all by itself.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, listen, Jem, that's absolutely brilliant talking to you again. And I hope we can get together in the future, whenever there's a big historical film to go into. And let's hope this trend continues. I prefer talking about these films to I love comic books, and James Peaty, I'm happy to talk to him any day of the week about comic books as well. But
he was great fun. I loved his episode.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.